We need to realize that the rhetoric and firing people up and, even things, for example, we're on Sarah Palin's targeted list, but the thing is that the way that she has it depicted has the crosshairs of a gun sight over our district. And when people do that, they've got to realize there's consequences to that action.
Welcome back to Harvard. That was then Congresswoman Gabby Giffords back in 2010 calling for more civility after there was a rise of heated rhetoric following the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Well, Giffords was shot the following year while campaigning in her home district. And as we discussed, a new poll by NPR, PBS, and Marist finds that 82%, more than 4 in 5 of us, of likely voters say they are concerned about the lack of civility we're seeing in Washington and how it's going to lead to violence. This comes on the heels of numerous high-profile domestic attacks in just the past weeks, including a politically charged campaign of mail bombs, the murder of 2 African Americans by a white man in Kentucky, and the murder of 11 people at a synagogue in Pittsburgh last weekend. More, I'm joined by Captain Mark Kelly, Gabby Giffords' husband, and co-founder of the advocacy group Giffords Courage to Fight Gun Violence. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly. Give us a sense of the way, in your head, and the experience in what your family's lost in terms of the gunfire on your wife and all of that, the recuperation and all that. And how do you see talk and shooting as connected?
Well, Gabby's, her being shot and 6 of her constituents being murdered and 12 other people being injured in 15 seconds. It's a complicated number of reasons why this happens. But when she was injured back in 2011, it was also a time, it was around just after a year after the passing of the Affordable Care Act. And there was a lot of heated rhetoric politically about this. And she certainly, was targeted because she was a member of Congress. That's clear. And the words and the language we use do matter. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people at some pretty high levels that don't seem to realize that yet. But it certainly does have an impact.
You and I have lived through it. I've lived through maybe more history, and I remember during the November period of 1963, and all those weeks we were hearing about the violent attitude down in Dallas, Texas, and how people were out to get Kennedy. There were ads in the paper, horrible stuff, calling him a traitor. Adlai Stevenson, the ambassador to the UN, was spat upon. There was all that atmospherics. And then a guy on the hard left, a communist sympathizer, Lee Harvey Oswald, comes and shoots Kennedy. Somehow there seems to be some kind of almost electrical atmospherics that sort of creates something that may not be related. The same thing happened in the spring of '68. Dr. King is shot and Bobby's shot. It does seem to be atmospheric. Your thoughts about that? That when it gets into our systems and people who are a little nutty to begin with or a little far out politically think, oh, here's my permission slip to shoot somebody.
Well, so 1963 was a year before I was born, so I wasn't really paying attention then, certainly. And but we see this over and over again, and it seems to go in cycles. And our partisanship is somewhat cyclic. I think we're at a pretty bad time right now, probably the worst set, I've seen since I've been paying attention, perhaps even, the worst since the early 1960s. And I think people that we elect need to realize that their words do matter. And if they say certain things, they are giving certain individuals who, probably have some, possibly mental health issues or somewhat unstable. But it's not good for us as, people who are in leadership positions to try to give these people some form of political cover.
Let's talk about gun control, gun safety. I notice the NRA isn't spending much money this cycle. Is that because they don't have much to fight, or there isn't enough noise out there or concern publicly by candidates about gun safety?
Yeah, they've had some issues. In New York City, they had a lawsuit. They claimed that affected their bottom line. They've got some financial issues right now, but they also have millions of members that they just raised the membership fee. I don't think it's really a financial thing with them, despite some of the things they've said. I think really what it comes down to is they're starting to realize that their side of this issue doesn't play very well in an election, even in a midterm election. We have a lot of Democrats and even some Republicans that are running on the side of, hey, we need stronger gun laws. We need gun safety. We've got veterans running across the country on this issue. There was a NBC Wall Street Journal poll that just came out, and it put gun safety, I think, at right after health care and the economy as an issue that people really care about.
Yeah.
The National Rifle Association, they're even hiding the letter grades that they traditionally give members of Congress and people in state governments. So they're currently underwater. They've got a negative approval rating. They're favorable, unfavorables at minus 17%. It's certainly the lowest since we've been paying attention. And it's because the American people are starting to realize that our laws do matter, and there are organizations out there like the NRA that are advocating for weaker gun laws, and that's not making us more safe.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.